But that's always changing. So, but that's something to keep in mind, keep on the forefront. Sharing your collection. One of the greatest gifts that I have had the opportunity to be involved with is our company does a lot of tours around the world. I don't usually get to go because somebody has to hold the fort down while the important people in the company get to go on these. But like to Russia or Italy or wherever. There is nothing better than to open your collection to people. Even if you think you don't have a big collection, you would be shocked at how important it is to give grade school kids a tour of your collection, particularly those of you who have purchased art from the artist, because you have a personal relationship with the artist. And when you talk to people, whether it's a senior group, whether it's a school group, whether it's a group of friends, an organization that you belong to, Rotary, whatever, if you allow people to come in and see your collection, it is such a rewarding experience from the people who you're sharing it with, because you can tell stories about who you bought that art from. That is such a wonderful experience. So think about sharing your collection with people. It's such a and Susan does such a great job with bringing people to see other people's collections around the country. I mean, I think that's one of the coolest things that Susan and Jake do in their off season. They don't really have an off season because I talk to her 12 months out of the year, but I'm pretty sure she doesn't have downtime, but anyway. But that's something that would be so lovely to do. And artists too, to do their art walks and their studio tours. I mean, it's throughout the rest of the year when they're not here. It's just so great. So that's kind of that part of it. At this point, do you all have any questions for any of us?
I want to say that there's no such thing as just a small piece of art, because every artwork can grow in value, and you might think, in fact, Jake and I started our collection mainly by buying small pieces because we wanted to have original art. There's nothing wrong with reproductions, but we just have always been exposed to original art, and actually I grew up with artists in my family. So in the earlier days, and still now, we will buy a lot of small pieces because of space or because of budget, but they're still very important. And I'm going to give you an example. And we haven't really talked about this yet, but for those of you, the other thing that's not popular to talk about is when we go on and graduate, who might want your collection? And in our family, we have a saying that, we got to put our name on the back of the things that we want dibs on. So, we all have certain pieces of art that our parents own that mean something to us. And so, I'll go, hey, I got dibs on that piece. And an example of one that I have my name on is many, many years ago when my stepmom was executive director at Scottsdale Artist School, and they always have a wonderful auction every year, and they still do, and I recommend supporting the arts through those sorts of things, as well as supporting the arts directly here. But many years ago, my dad and stepmom bid on a very small piece of Gary Ernest Smith, who was teaching at the school at that time, and got it for a song. And he's one of those artists that's like off the charts now. So when you buy a small piece, don't think small. But the number one thing we've all touched on is the number one most important thing in buying a piece of art is what?
Like it.
Make sure you love it. Yeah, that's the most important thing. The value of how it makes you feel and how you connect with it is the most important thing. But in addition to that, do the little extra steps to archive, keep the records, keep track of it, And then I love the artwork, and you're right, artwork archives, not art archives, because we can't all keep track of what's happening around the country and when somebody's work may be going. And we have an auction happening today and tomorrow in downtown Scottsdale at the Legacy Gallery Scottsdale Art Auction, and it's referred to as the Lien Tree collection. And the owner of Lien Tree, Ed Trumbull, has been a collector here at the Celebration of Fine Art for decades. Since the very beginning, Ed and his wife Marilyn would come every year and collect art. And his company, Lien Tree, was a greeting card company out of Colorado, and they would buy some pieces for which they would make cards and have holiday cards and mailing cards. But all of those pieces went into their collection, a museum collection. And you can see I got a couple of the catalogs. If you want to flip through at the end, there's all the information, little history of most of them. He got a lot early on with a lot of these artists when they were first emerging. There's artwork from Bryce Pettit and Martha Pettigrew, and I can't remember. Martha, there's 3 of yours going up for auction. And those are the things like the artwork archive would keep track of, because we can't all go to all the auctions. You can get auction reports online, but it'll be exciting to see. I think you had a piece recently that was a sold out edition of yours that went for $25,000. So, that's something to keep track of, and we can't all do it on our own without maybe a little support, but this is a perfect example of a well-curated, well-documented, kept all the provenance, and Ed had personal relationships with probably everybody in this catalog, just like Eddie Basha did, and many of our collectors. And as Ann said, one of our favorite things, we've been in talks before, we are always so honored when we get to see people's collections in their homes, and it can be a few treasured pieces that they've purchased, or some of our collectors have multiple pieces, but there is something very special about that, and art is meant to be shared. And I know, and you might be able to speak to this recent, the Leonardo da Vinci, a lot of people were not in favor of it ending in a private collection, because art is meant to be seen and meant to be shared. As it turns out, it was the Abu Dhabi, the Dubai Louvre is going to be, so we can all get on a chartered airplane and go to Dubai perhaps, and we can see.
For a lot less than $450 million.
Yes.
But it's interesting when she talked about you should buy what you love, right? And I some of you might be kind of following this trend where there are these mega collectors that buy these huge pieces of work, and then for tax reasons, they warehouse them in these kind of special places that are tax havens. I mean, they're just basically like, obviously very high-end warehouses in certain parts of the world. Have any of you heard about that? And so they put them in there, and I read that and I think, so they don't even get to enjoy the art. And so it's just a pure investment. And obviously other people their friends aren't even seeing that piece of art. So it's an interesting trend that will probably continue to grow as we see these kind of, big prices on art. But the interesting thing about that too, from an insurance perspective, or at least interesting in my world, is those places won't actually even, no matter what your price tag is, and there probably is a certain amount that they would do, but let's say I have that $450 million Da Vinci. I cannot store that anywhere, even in those secret, hideaway tax havens. I can't store. Most of those companies will not allow me to store that piece there unless I can prove that it's insured. So you think about it, like that's kind of the ripple effect of insurance, that because if you're that company, you're just like, we're not going to take the liability of having that here, and it has no insurance, because if something happens, then there's an argument about who has the responsibility. So it's interesting. Probably no one in here, I don't know, maybe, has theirs stored at some secret location like that. But if you have a chance, and probably don't have a way to share the link, the story about that Da Vinci and what they had to do to move that piece, and the intrigue, and they used decoy trucks, and on and on and on to make sure that nobody was going to steal that piece while it was going from wherever where it was at Christie's, I believe, from there to the end destination. So it's quite a, I'm thinking that the article talks about this could be a movie. Maybe eventually it will be a movie, because you think about what's involved in a piece like that, and actually, how do you put a value on a piece like that? But any questions here?
What's the movie with Pierce Brosnan? Pierce and Renee Zellweger?
Yeah, it was a remake.
Oh, yeah. Crown Affair.
Thomas Crown Affair.
Thomas
Yeah.
Crown Affair.
Crown Affair.
Very
Yeah. So any questions? We've talked about sort of the nuts and bolts, the business side of protecting your art. Any questions?
So I'm just going to move on to this last section, which all of us have to think about at some point in our lives. Hopefully sooner than later. And that is what's going to happen to our art collection. And it doesn't matter whether you have one piece or 50 or 500. You have to make some plans as far as where it's going to go. Don't assume that your children or your dogs are going to want to keep this. Chances are, from all the surveys we do, most of your heirs aren't going to like the same art you like. It's a trend that we see come and go. Western art is hot, modern art is hot, whatever. It happens, it's so cyclical. Anyway, and also don't assume because you have some beautiful pieces of art that you're going to just give them to a museum. Museums will not take art that is not endowed to be taken care of in perpetuity. And so you have to make some plans. And if you just write it in your will that your art, be it jewelry, be it painting, sculpture, whatever, that you're just going to leave it to your grandson, who is 3 years old, because when he grows up, he's going to love it. They're going to like, my grandkid, yeah, right. They aren't going to. Anyway, you do have to make some plans. And it's the hardest thing to do because you love that art. And you know these artists. And you want them to have the best that you love. Unless they have made that significant decision, that isn't going to work. And as an artist, we just wrote an article last year about Glenna Goodacre, who is a world-renowned sculptor who made the decision to do the last castings of all of her sculpture and sell it. Happened to be through the Scottsdale Artists auction. Scottsdale Art Auction. Sorry, I used to be on the board of the Scottsdale Artist School, so I can't get that wording out properly. But the Scottsdale Art Auction did an auction last year of her work, or actually, yeah, last year. She made this decision in her 80s to actually oversee the last castings and patina, et cetera, and then broke all the molds. She didn't want to be in a Harry Jackson kind of situation. I don't know if you're familiar with Harry Jackson, a completely eccentric sculptor and painter from Cody, Wyoming, who has stuck his kids, to this day, he's been dead for a decade, stuck his kids with his art, with no decision as to how it was going to be dealt with. And he had a foundry in Italy. They had to move it all over. They're trying to get a museum to buy the whole kit and caboodle, but he doesn't have an endowment. They're trying to get a grant to do that, blah, blah, blah. Now, we're talking bazillion dollars worth of things, but they're continuing to cast these molds, and it's after he's dead, so they're worthless, and it's such a mess. Anyway, so whether you're an artist or a collector, you have to think about what's going to happen to this art when you're not around anymore. And if you don't plan it, see, Ralph is like, he wants my art. I know he does. But it's so critical that you think about this. And I met this gentleman a number of years ago. I see him every year at the Coeur d'Alene Art Auction in Reno, Nevada. And he loves to collect art. But he went to his alma mater, which is some Texas university that I can't remember the name of. And he went to them and he said, I want to give you my collection, but I want to do it with you, the curator of their art museum. I want to do it with you in mind. Let's work on this together. He happens to like Boreens, which I love too. And so that's primarily what he collects. But he's collecting it with the idea that when he's gone, he's going to give this to this museum. And this is not a wealthy man. I mean, he's got enough money to obviously buy good historical art. But he's buying it with the idea that he's going to endow this collection. It's going to have his name on it. A lot of museums do have, you know, small places where they'll do a little wing of a specific kind of art. As long as you're thinking in terms of how is this going to be paid for in perpetuity. But if you really care in that sense about a specific art form, and you know a specific museum that would like that kind of situation, it's a wonderful way to give your art to a specific organization, which is another situation. You might want to give it to a school. There are lots of opportunities to give your art to someplace, but don't think that your heirs are going to do this. A number of years ago, I had the opportunity to work with a family who owned a lot of Maynard Dixons, a lot, like 30 or 35 Maynard Dixons. They're these three boys. Their parents owned a restaurant in San Francisco. When Maynard Dixon didn't have any money, he would paint paintings, give it to the restaurant so he could eat. And they hung in the family home. And then eventually the mother died. The father died a long time before that. The mother died a few years ago. They decided that they were going to sell this collection. They were in shock when they found out that even though these pieces were going for hundreds of thousands of dollars, that they don't get a lot of that because there's buyer's premiums, there's all these other things that are added on to the auction price. So just because something went for $350,000, they weren't getting $350,000. So you really have to think about that part of your collection. It's very frustrating to have to think about that, but it's good to sit down with your CPA, with appropriate people, with your children, if that's the case, or whatever, and talk about your art. And as Susan said, they really want something, make sure that you're not leaving it to squabbles after you're gone. Nasty stuff. Yeah. I'm sure she and Doug have had a long conversation about this. Doug's looking at it like, yeah, but I wanted that piece. That's that. Just real quick, how many of you have more than 15 pieces of original art in your household? And how many of those pieces are insured with an insurance company that has actually got the names and the value today's value?
So might there have been some value in this presentation?
This gentleman is counting on his fingers as to how many he's got insured. seriously, think about this. It's worth it. It is really worth doing all of these things we've talked about today. And we'll stay up here and talk to you individually about these. If you would like to get a free subscription to Fine Art Connoisseur Plein Air magazine, make sure that you let Susan know. She will obviously have your information, but she won't give it to me unless you tell me you want that, because we don't pry that out of people, but I would be glad to send you a free subscription for sitting through this. Oh yes, and in this issue is the giant poster that we're so excited that Fine Art Connoisseur has this lovely capability of having every year in our January, February issue.
You have to pull it out before you unfold it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yay!
Very nice. Love it.
Thank you, Anne and Kathleen, for your expertise and your time and sharing your knowledge. And thank you all for being here. And we totally appreciate you. Next week is the making of a monument. We'll have some of our sculptors sharing about the how-to process behind how do you get from having an idea to having a life-size monumental sculpture placed somewhere. Please let us know if you have questions. And then we're going to gather as many artists as we can. For the first year ever, we worked with Fine Art Connoisseur on a Patron's Choice Award and an Artist's Choice Award. So on opening weekend, patrons had the opportunity to select their favorite artists, and that was really hard to do. And the same thing, the artists had the chance to select their favorite artist. So I know not all of them can be here because some of them are studiously working or talking to people, but we invite you to stay, and I'm going to turn it over to Anne to present the awards. Shall we start with the Artist's Choice?
Are we going to do this right this second?
Well, we can.
Do we know everyone that we want to give an award to is here? Okay. Thank you very much. Casey Costello over here. If you don't know Casey, you're missing an opportunity for a fun night out. I'm just saying.
Wow.
In many cities, we've had fun night outs. Many cities. Okay. Yes.
So the artist choice, with all the artists had the opportunity to select their favorite among the 10, which is very hard to do. There's so many excellent artists, and they selected.
Yeah, drum roll, major drum roll. So this is really exciting to me because I have often felt, I give a lot of Artist Choice Awards around the world, and I think this is the creme de la creme award to win, because if your fellow artists think you're the best in this 100 artist show, like what could be better? I think it's an incredible honor. So it's extremely exciting to me. What they're winning is a $2,150 half-page award in Fine Art Connoisseur. But this is extremely exciting to me because we don't have a lot of jewelry shown in our magazine. I wish we had more, but this winner happens to be a jeweler, and which is really exciting. And her name is Elizabeth Hock. Where do you live, Elizabeth?
I live in Erie, Colorado, right outside of Boulder. I'm so excited. I was kind of like nervous, and I was like, I better look good because I have a feeling people keep looking at me and walking by my booth and looking at my sign, how to spell my name and stuff. I had a feeling. Thank you so much. I'm so excited.
Yay, Elizabeth. And just remember, this too. I mean, the creativity that goes into her work, and I often will hear somebody say, you know, we have a bunch of artists, and then, oh, the sculptors are coming too. And I'm like, well, they're artists too. So we have the finest art jewelry in the country. So, and next will be the patron's choice, which I'm sure was just horribly difficult for people to choose. But.
So this is particularly fun to me because I happen to know this artist fairly well. It's a he, so I'm really sorry for all the women. I like to give awards to women. I think all women should win awards. As my boyfriend told me the other day, Renaissance women, back in the Renaissance time period, not that we're all not Renaissance people now, but Renaissance women were not allowed to sell their art. So I'm such a proponent of women artists. But this happens to be a male. So, you know, we all know white males get the schlock jobs now. So anyway, this happens to be a sculptor. Okay, we're narrowing the field a little. There's so many good sculptors here, but I particularly like this sculptor because he introduced me to my favorite fly fishing buddy this summer. Okay, so now we've really narrowed it down. But the Patron's Choice Award goes to Bryce Pettit.
Thank you so much.
So this is an honor because he's a great artist. You've probably all been to his booth, but congratulations.
Thank you so much.
And Ralph is excited too. And it just so happens he's on next week's panel. So come see him again.
Wow.
All right. Thank you all for coming.